Recording in progress. First of all, if anybody cannot see or hear me, please contact the moderator. Is it Shax?
A Shaxi, yeah.
Shaxi, and they will take care of you. If you want to turn on your video or unmute to ask a question as we go along, that's fine. I am going to warn you that I'm going to be doing a lot of talking and I have just enough time to squeeze it all in, so we might want to save questions till the end. But feel free to post comments or questions in the chat. That is totally fine. And I will count on Shashi to keep track of that for me. Okay, so my name is Joshua McDonald the Imperfect. This class is the history of Clan Bluefeather. I live in the Kingdom of Atlantia in the Barony of Duncarrig. I've been involved in the SCA for coming up on probably 35 years now. And I've been involved with the Clan Bluefeather almost that entire time. Well, I actually know that entire time because really the clan had formed right before I started to be involved in the SCA, and I was involved from the beginning of my time in the SCA. So I know a little bit about the history of the clan, and as historians, we are terrible at keeping track of our own history. So as the years went by and memories started to fade and people that were involved fell out of the SCA, we started losing our history, and I didn't want that to happen. So I've done a lot of research over the years. I've talked to a lot of people who I still can contact over the years. I've given this class a number of times at this point, and it's constantly growing little bit by little bit because there's always new stuff to talk about. So I'm going to cover the 3 eras of the clan as I refer to them. And in each one, I'm also going to include the context of the modern society of that time period, because I've found that particularly with newcomers to the SCA and the next queer generation, they don't have the context of what we were going through in real life, let alone what was happening in the SCA. As I came in the end of the last class about inspirational equality, and people are going, you mean you couldn't fight for somebody of the same sex before? That's weird, because they don't have that context of what was happening 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And that's part of what this class is about. So first and foremost, I'll just get it out of the way. What is Clan Bluefeather? Clan Bluefeather is the social and research organization of the SCA, and it has been since 1988. Although it is called Clan Bluefeather, it is not structured like a traditional SCA household, which is a somewhat common misconception. There's no chieftain, there's no tribal council, there's no membership. We literally are the queer community of the SCA. So everybody falls under that LGBTQIA+ umbrella. Every gender and sexual minority is Bluefeather. Congratulations. If you're queer, you're Bluefeather. Hey, you just found out. And they're allies. We do welcome supporters to be part of the clan. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. So let me give that social context first. So we're going back to 1988. And the number one thing that defined the gay community in 1988 was the AIDS epidemic. Started in 1991, and it was an epidemic up and through till the early 90s, when things started to change for the better. There were pride parades, gay pride parades, as early as the 70s, but they didn't really start to blossom the way you see them today until the 90s. It wasn't even until 1999 that it was the first national Gay and Lesbian Pride Month. So a lot had to happen to get to the point where President Clinton was willing to sign a document saying, we're actually going to acknowledge Gay Pride Month. So in that mid to late 80s, early 90s timeframe, this is where we're at. There's no pride flag The pride flag was created in San Francisco in 1978, but it did not spread nationwide, let alone become a worldwide symbol until much, mid 90s. So we had no national symbol. We did have the pink triangle from the Holocaust. The lesbian community had the double-headed axe, the labrys. Those were not, recognized outside of the gay community. You saw those in gay bars. That was about it. There was no internet. There was no communication. There was hardly any email to really connect community. So all we had were in-person meetings, just like the SCA. So given the amount of political and community force that rose up because of the AIDS epidemic and because the queer community started fighting back and literally fighting for their lives, there was a groundswell of not gay pride as we know it today, but there was certainly gay activism. So in that context, as I've often said, as goes society, so goes the society. And very early on, in 1988, the Klan itself, we can say, was founded by Joseph Ohoda of Clan Ohoda. And he put an ad in the Pike Staff, which was the East Kingdom newsletter, in the June-July 1988 edition. And again, back then in the SCA, that's how you got your SCA news. Everybody got a newsletter in the mail on paper every month. And he put an ad in, paid for it himself. And he said, let's have a meeting at Penzic of that year, which of course was in August, I think, that year. But he said ahead to get ready, the purpose of the group, the purpose of having a meeting was to, and I'll quote, encourage the study and discussion of the gay, lesbian, and bisexual experiences in both the Middle Ages and the current Middle Ages. He asked people to contact him. He got 17 people contacted him from the East, Mid, West, and Kaid. And from that, he created a chicken scratch newsletter, paper newsletter, called But It's Period. And that began publishing the next month in July 88. So he said, let's have a meeting at Penzic. So our early history really revolves around those meetings at Penzic, 88, 89, 90, and 91. So 1988 was the first one. It was on Saturday night. They had it at 10 p.m. on the battlefield because they didn't want anybody to feel uncomfortable being seen going to a gay meeting. Again, very different time socially. So they had over 75 people show up. And I think everybody at that meeting was delighted and gobsmacked that so many people were interested in being involved. They billed it as a gay, lesbian, bisexual study group, but it quickly sort of was like, and social, don't forget, we like to meet other people and, oh, look, other queers that are in the SCA in Penzic. Very early on, too, they decided to remain open to having allies be a part of the group. Although in the beginning, there were not that many allies. There were more queer people interested in queer history and queer socializing than there were allies. Very different time. And then at that time, they decided to create a list of kingdom contacts so that if there's somebody in the East that wanted to learn more about the Klan or, find out about the newsletter or anything, they could either contact Joseph or they could contact, and at the time it was me. When I got involved, I put my name down as the East Kingdom contact. That's where I was at the time. Interestingly enough, there was no name associated. We were just the study group, a gay study group. There was no name decided that early. After that Penzic, they attempted to publish a sort of another ad in Tournaments Illuminated, which of course is the major SCA quarterly publication. And Tournaments Illuminated took it to the board of directors and said, can we do this? And the board of directors at the time said no. They are a support group. And so they can't put an ad in formally as part of the SCA. But eventually we bought a space in what they called the time the classified section, the Village Green. And they did put an ad in there a few times over the years. So now we're into 1989. Penzic rolls around again. They had originally scheduled again for that Saturday night. I think this was back still when Penzic was 1 week or even one weekend. But it turns out there was a night's vigil on the battlefield at the same time, and everybody thought that would not be a good idea to host it on the battlefield at the same time. So they had a Thursday night meeting, and then they had another Saturday meeting at Dark Horde Moratu, graciously agreed to host. And at that time, they said, well, okay, we're back. It's been a year. We want to start doing things. How do we do them? And are we going to have a name? Are we going to put a name to this group? So people started bandying around names. And one of the ones that sort of rose to the top was the Plume Azul, which then, of course, just got simplified to the Blue Feather. And interestingly, that wasn't the name. They decided that would be a good symbol for the group. And and everyone asks, why the Blue Feather? And the best research I've been able to do is that someone read somewhere, which, is the bane of every historian, that female troubadours of Renaissance Venice used to wear blue feathers to indicate that they were interested in other women. No one has ever been able to find that source or mention ever again. So it is completely apocryphal, but you might hear that from time to time. But that is, at the time, that's how that got sort of nominated as a possibility. And of course, everyone went, oh, what interesting research. Yes, we should use that. That sounds like a really good idea. And then, interestingly, there was sort of one person, his name was Denier, who, if anybody goes to Penzic, he sort of used to be a Penzic fixture. He ran around to every merchant at Penzic, bought every blue feather he could find, and just started handing them out to people and said, here's the blue feather. Remember, we talked about blue feather? Here, blue, 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 blue. And the next thing you know, everybody had a blue feather, and it kind of stuck at that point. At that meeting, they also talked about expanding sort of the reach and the advertising and reaching out to new members and getting new people involved and letting people know that, hey, there's some queers in the SCA that, we're on your side. We're here to support you. Tournaments Illuminated would not publish any submitted research articles, but they did eventually publish a list of special interest SCA publications. So it was things like Armorers Guild or Limner's Guild or things like that. They did include the Blue Feather newsletter in that. But then eventually they took all that out of TI and they moved it over into the regular publication of the Arts and Sciences. And that didn't get seen as much. Unless you were an arts and science person already, you weren't really seeing that newsletter. So it was disappointing that they changed it, but they did throw us in there for a little while. And then people were starting to act locally and being like, hey, there's this new group, blah, blah, blah. And this is sort of a lot of what happened during that time, but some groups and kingdoms were supportive and some groups and kingdoms were not. So like, not to call anybody out, but like Anstiora would not let anything be published in their newsletter, but the East did. So you can chalk that up to, again, regular society, areas of the country, however you want to parse that. But it was definitely a mixed bag of reactions at the time, again, as things were going in mundane society. So now we're into our third year, 1990. 2 more meetings at Penzic that year and discussed again, where are we going with this? We got this blue feather. Are we going with blue feather? Like, what are we like? Now that we want to like sort of grow, what are we going to do? So eventually Clan Blue Feather sort of rose to the top, and people at that meeting decided this was a good idea. With that came the discussion of what structure are we going to have? Is it going to be a true clan? Are we going to be an SCA household? Are we going to try for something else? And the general consensus was, for now at least, let's just keep things community. Nobody's in charge, and we'll research some other ideas. Interestingly, the Blue Feather caught on enough, at least at Pennsic, that there was a rumor going around that a bunch of homophobic fighters were going to go to Harold's Point and register a Blue Feather as their device so that we couldn't have it. And as soon as we heard that, I think it was like 8 a.m. the next morning, Moses Van Falcon of the East Kingdom went right up to Harold's Point and registered it. And he registered, interestingly, in the Armory and Armorial of the SCA, it's called House Blue Feather, because we didn't, I don't know if he forgot or it wasn't quite decided at that point. So he registered it under his name for House Blue Feather. He also registered the name House Blue Feather as our official device, which is Argent A Feather Azure, which actually I guess is our badge because everybody can wear that. It passed A&S Laurel, December 1990, and most of the people who are involved in the clan consider that sort of our documentable, because of course historians love things you can actually document. That is our birthday, is December 1990 is our birth month, even though we'd sort of started beforehand. And then after that year, interestingly, a second newsletter started called The Blue Feather. So we have two newsletters, we have a name, we have a symbol, we have a device. We're actually moving as a group. I got involved right after that in 1991. So I'm 3 years behind the curve, but I'm catching up. I remember when I got started in the SCA, I got involved, I got sort of drawn into it through my queer friends, because of course there's the intersection of the SCA and queerdom is, as we know, practically two identical circles at times. But there's a very big Venn diagram overlap. So a lot of queer friends in the SCA, they sort of got me involved. And when I was asking about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, there's a whole group at Pennsic. You can go hang out with them. I don't know much about them, but you can find them." Someone had talked about forming an encampment at Pennsic that year for Clan Blue Feather, but it never really pulled together. So I ended up just sort of crashing with friends. And I do remember that year there was a lesbian hand fasting at, I think, House Thistle. And they invited everybody that had attended the clan meeting that year to go. So of course we all went, hey, social event, chance to hang out. And at the meeting, I sort of said, well, how come there's no Blue Feather encampment at Pennsic? Not really knowing much about the SCA at the time. And all the older folks, the folks that were sort of in the SCA for a while, said, no one would be interested in that. Everyone's going to camp with their home barony or their existing household. They're not going to just camp with a bunch of queers. But we all go to this wedding, and then afterwards they leave, and us younger folks, because I was young at the time, we're sitting around afterwards talking. And I said, I don't really want to camp with I don't know that many people in my local barony yet. I'm new. I'd rather camp with a bunch of queer folk. And like a half a dozen people were like, me too. If you start a camp, I'll camp with you. And I'm like, okay, so I'll look into it. So the following year, I started the Blue Feather encampment at Pennsic, and it's been going strong ever since. We'll get into that in a little bit too. Interestingly, also in 91, again, this kind of tells you how quickly things can go sort of viral even without the internet. The Pennsic Independent? No, it was the Pennsic Daily Tidings, I think, at the time, the predecessor to the current Pennsic Daily newspaper. They actually published what we assume was a tongue-in-cheek article about, well, if the gay people are going to have the Blue Feather, let's come up with some other feathers. And a black one will mean that you're in, or a leather one will mean you're kinky, and a red one will mean you're a flaming heterosexual, and a peacock feather will mean you're an exhibitionist. And we all sat there and laughed and said, oh, look, the straights just reinvented the hanky code. And if you don't know what the hanky code is, Google it. But we got a good laugh out of that. So in 92, we had the first official encampment at Penzic, and we got moved around for a couple of years. We eventually settled on block E12. We've been there ever since. I think we passed our 30th year at this point. We're well in creeping up on 35. Hugely successful, very open. We're one of the few encampments at Penzic that takes people off the street. You don't have to know anybody. There's no initiation. There's no sponsorship or anything like that. It's like if you're queer, and even if you're not queer and you want to camp with us, you can camp with us. And to this day, we haven't had to kick anybody out, so it's worked out pretty well. We've built a very strong ethos in the camp for what kind of camp we want to have. So that takes us to 92. And then in 93, Tristan Alexander had what he called the Blue Feather Ball, which was basically just a party that he had in his camp. And he did it for a year or two, and then he didn't want to do it anymore, so I took it over. And then I grew it into a much bigger event. We moved from A&S tents to the dance floor, and now we're in the Great Hall, which is the largest venue. And the reason we had to move into the largest venue is we, A, outgrew the dance tent, and B, we were the biggest event at Penzic, public event sort of at Penzic at the time, social event. So, we that's been extraordinarily successful. Last year for Penzic 50, we had over 500 people attend, and that was absolutely hands down a record that we've ever had. So very successful over the years. Great seeing new people come. If you ever come to Penzic, please come to the Blue Feather Ball. So in that 88 to 93 timeframe, like I said, much of what we did revolved around Penzic, but there were a few other things going on elsewhere in the SCA. We had an unofficial sort of salon, or whatever you want to call it, in 1992 in the East Kingdom. We had our first official SCA sponsored clan event in 1996 in the East. There was a coffee house of sorts, of informal sort of gatherings in regular gatherings in Antir at the time. As other wars other than Penzic were starting to grow, Gulf Wars, Estrella, other people were starting to be like, well, why don't we have a little get together, a very informal thing. So I know Tigger Togs is a merchant, and he's always sponsored like a little gathering one night during Gulf Wars, and that's become sort of a big thing there over the years. And then as the symbol of the blue feather grew and became more well known, more and more people would see each other, identify, and form local groups and sort of connect and network in that way. Because again, still didn't have that rainbow flag that was a national symbol, recognized symbol yet. It still was sort of reserved, sort of still stuck in San Francisco, or at least on the West Coast. And let alone all the pride flags we have today, the trans flag, the non-binary flag, all the other flags that are out there now for these different communities. None of those existed back then. There were sort of ongoing discussions about the structure, and finally, as every time the meeting about what are we going to do, about how are we going to run this group, every single time someone said no. Like the majority of people at every meeting would say, let's just leave it at a community level. Let's basically make it for us, by us. As long as you're doing it with even Moses, who registered the device, and technically it sort of belongs to him, he said, as long as you use it with honor and chivalry, use the device. So nobody wanted to sort of be in charge of, God forbid there be conflicts and people have to resolve them. Let's just do things as a community together without any sort of structure. So if you want something done, you have to do it. And people started taking initiatives sort of all over the SCA. I continued at Penzic very strongly. Another tradition that caught on was a dark blue feather, like a navy blue or a royal blue, meant you were part of the LGBTQ community. A light blue, like a sky blue or maybe a peacock blue, meant you are an ally to the community. And again, cultural difference. Today, people say, particularly younger people, are like, well, that's a stupid differentiation. Like, anybody who's an ally wouldn't care if they were mistaken for being actually queer themselves. But in 1990, allies wanted to be allies, but they kind of didn't want to be, beaten up on the sidewalk. So we obliged everybody. Just at the time, everybody said, that's a good idea. If you want a symbol, basically became the straight ally flag, and there is an ally flag today. The black and white A inside the rainbow flag. So, the allies were like, we want a symbol to show our support, and in a way, there was also an argument of, we don't want to take away your symbol because we understand it's important to you to identify and meet other people in your community. So between those arguments, it just sort of fell naturally that tradition started. So there is a light blue, dark blue differentiation. It's not meant to exclude, and it's not meant to other. It's meant to give each community their own identity. And like I said, and be respectful of the queer community. Obviously, people were doing research. Both newsletters were full of research over the years. There were some people that were pretty prolific. I have a long-term goal of taking all the past newsletters, digitizing them and putting them online, but that's a long-term goal. But there was a lot of stuff being published, as well as poetry and art. In fact, I do have a little bit of a show and tell. I can say, for example, this is, for example, a copy of the Blue Feather. It was a half-page booklet, and it was full of poetry and research. And then the very first issue of the But It's Period was a full page, two double-sided pages, just printed out in one plain font, back and front, mailed to everybody, once a month or so, or once every other month, I think. Very low tech. But of course, now we're getting into the early 90s. Things definitely changed. More social stuff was happening, more community stuff was happening. People were starting to openly get involved in the SCA. So it wasn't, I'm doing a shift at Penzic. It's a whole bunch of Klan members are all doing shifts together at Penzic, and we're all going to wear our blue feathers. So people can see us riding around in the golf carts and saying, oh, look, the Blue Feathers are doing a shift. Blue Feathers would take over the troll booth at an event. Blue Feathers would host a party and advertise it at an event. Things were definitely starting to grow as people were more and more comfortable being out and being open to welcoming new people as well. There was still kingdom contact lists. Each kingdom sort of had a point of contact if people wanted more information. We did over the years sort of create a Domesday, which is more like an address book. So every time there'd be a gathering, people would sort of write down their, at that point, we were starting to collect email addresses. Ooh, high tech. Those have those have sort of fallen out of fashion, but we did have them collected at some points whenever we wanted to, let people know what was going on at the next Penzic or something like that. One of the things that did come out of all the research was, how can the Klan be more formally recognized in the SCA? Because as we know, households in the SCA are not recognized by the SCA. Only landed zip codes are, as baronies and shires and whatnot. So, but every kingdom's different. So a couple of people started doing research into their own kingdoms, and we discovered that there were verities from kingdom to kingdom, and there was a possibility of doing something to get a sort of a formal recognition. One of the things was in Qaid, you could get chartered by the crown, which basically said the crown writes a lovely scroll, makes a lovely proclamation saying, this group of people is kind of cool, and we recognize them as part of the king, as a vibrant and authentic, important part of the kingdom. And Giles Hill, who later became one of the first, I think he was actually the first same-sex barons, landed barons in Qaid. In 1992, the crown did do that. And we actually do have that document somewhere. So people sort of started looking around, but again, varied kingdom to kingdom, and we needed contacts in those kingdoms to make those things happen and actually go through the process, and not very many people did. In the East Kingdom, we found out you could get chartered as a guild. So we, at the time, were saying there were a certain group of people that really wanted to see the clan grow that said, we get that the community part is always going to be community driven, and that we don't need a governing body to do that. But that doesn't mean we can't maybe someday recognize our own with awards. And maybe that's something we could do using the framework of what the East was saying, which is the only way you can be recognized is to become a guild. So we actually developed a proposal. It was mostly Alexandros Pantelios of the East, who said, let's create a formal structure where you can opt into the guild. You're automatically a member of the clan if you're queer or you decide you're part of the clan. That's a no-brainer. But if you'd like to be involved in some of the other stuff, like maybe if we start doing this stuff, you can opt into the guild, become a member of the guild, and then that gives you voting rights or polling rights if we decide to come up with an award structure. And we did. We said, let's do a service, fighting, and arts and sciences award, just like most other baronies and the kingdoms and everybody else. So we proposed it, we put it to the crown, and the crown said, no, because we consider guilds to be something that is historically documentable, and a group of gay and lesbian people is not something that would have existed in period. So we would not charter you as a guild. That has since changed. I think it depends on who's sitting on the throne. But according to the laws of the East, that is actually true, that they have sort of stricter guidelines about what constitutes a guild. But again, some of it's open to royal interpretation, and it varies from kingdom to kingdom. That framework, though, we kept and figured we might still use it one day. We haven't, because we were so disheartened by being rejected by the East that it's just sort of sat there since. So it's not something that we're particularly pushing, but it could always phoenix out again one day if we decided to go down that road. Of course, then again, so many people are getting awards for their work, not necessarily in Clan Bluefeather, but for their queer and diversity work, that it might not even be something that's necessary anymore. So that takes us through right around 1993. And then things sort of settled. And this is what I call our second era. Alexandros refers to it as the long silence. And this was from about mid-90s to mid-2010. So we're talking a 20-year span. Again, let me give you some societal context. The AIDS epidemic was brought under control. Obviously not eliminated, but with things like AZT and other new treatments, people were not dying in the numbers that they were dying in before. And of course, society moved on from that headline. We didn't, but society did. But because of what came out of the AIDS epidemic and that groundswell of political activism, that also started to shift societal attitudes. And pride celebrations started to shift from activism to visibility and community and pride. Pride events themselves started to spread outside of the major metropolitan areas. In the beginning, it was New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Philadelphia, DC. That was probably about it for a long time. Then suddenly all these other cities were like, well, why can't we do one in Houston? Why can't we do one in Denver? Why can't we do one? And then even beyond that, in the early 2000s, then you see little smaller and smaller municipalities are starting to have their own pride parades from like the late 90s into the early 2000s. And with that also came the spread of the rainbow flag, because everybody knew the pink triangle. Pink triangle carries a lot of baggage. Deserved baggage, because we can never forget our history, that we were persecuted in the Holocaust. but a lot of people wanted something new. You know, ACT UP, which was the largest and most vocal AIDS activist group, had a pink triangle as part of their symbol because they basically were saying, we will not be killed. We will not be eliminated as a community. But people said, okay, we want something more. We want something new. We want something positive. We want something forward thinking. We want something. And the rainbow caught on and started to spread along with all these pride celebrations across the country. And again, with it came that shift in societal attitudes. What the Klan did in the SCA, it was basically sort of a long, slow buildup of respectability and visibility and awareness. More people were identifying with the blue feather, more people were carrying around with them. We certainly kept a lot of the traditions and a lot of the events, Blue Feather Ball, the encampment at Penzic, the meetings at Penzic, but we were becoming, for better or for worse, known as an SCA institution. Everybody pretty much knew what the blue feather was. I know not everybody does or did, but it was certainly much more general than it ever was before. And people would see people wearing the blue feathers and would know what it meant and would see them being seneschals and event stewards and doing all the things that we normally do in the SCA. The newsletters eventually stopped publishing, and that gave way to the internet. So they both stopped publishing in the late 90s for lack of content and effort and money. We also had some really interesting conversations about, you know, like any other minority group, we're not a monolith. So it was also evident that there was not necessarily complete agreement over how we should do things or who should do things. And one of those things was things like same-sex monarchs, which was being discussed a long time ago. And some people said, no, I don't think that's a good idea at all. You're gonna harsh my medieval mellow. I'm in the SCA to see a king and a queen on the throne. And this was coming from gay men and lesbians. But of course, not everyone felt that way. And of course, that eventually changed too. But as I said, we moved from newsletters into the internet age. There was an email echo. At least that started, I think, around 97. So it was just email at first. Then there was Yahoo groups. Now there's Facebook and Discord and a bunch of other things. Eventually, we developed a website. So the communication really changed. And obviously, social media has changed everything, both for Clan Blue Feather, the gay community, and of course for the SCA. Things started to change a little bit in the early 2010s. And this is what I refer to as our third and current era. Again, that modern societal context. Pride is everywhere. Can't swing a dead cat without hitting a pride flag somewhere. And that's for every community under the rainbow umbrella. Major shift in societal attitudes. And really, it's that next generation. It's that, you know, I'm Generation X. I'm just inside Generation X. You've got millennials and Gen Zers who are like grew up on the internet. They have very different attitudes towards the way they're going to be treated by society and the SCA. So that comes into that. They don't have that previous 20 years history. They only know what they have and what they want, and they're making stuff happen. And it's been amazing, not only in the SCA, but on a societal level. So very much an uptick of activity starting in the early 10s. And one of those things was the inspirational equality movement. Same-sex marriage was happening in the United States. It wasn't national yet, but it was happening state by state. Therefore, it was being discussed in the SCA. Why can't we have two kings or two queens sitting on the throne? So in 2013, that's when the U.S. Supreme Court made their decision. And of course, all over the world, obviously, that situation was changing year by year. So it started being discussed very seriously in the SCA. There's even a class during this event about the history of inspirational equality. some local baronies had already had same-sex barons and baronesses, and things were going, as I like to say, the SCA did not burn down, fall over, and then sink into the swamp because there were two barons sitting on the throne. And interestingly, the IE movement was not spearheaded by the clan. It was a completely separate group of individuals, some gay, some straight, that really sort of like said, let's organize and let's come up with a plan and write proposals and write to the bod and get people's feedback on this. So in 2012, the bod removed the of the opposite sex requirement, but they left it up to each individual kingdom. And after a few years of that, seeing that no kingdom, I think, had ever refused a same-sex couple for them being gay, at least. I know of at least one same-sex couple, same-sex pair that was disqualified, but that was for other reasons. They eventually said no. It's not going to be up to the kingdoms. We're codifying it in corpora. The first same-sex royalty was in North Shield in 2016. Wonderful, wonderful reign from what I hear, and yay, North Shield. So I think that was a big watershed moment for the inspirational equality movement. And then eventually in 2019, the bod said, no, this is a done deal. You can fight for whoever you want to fight. And that also, fortunately, there's sort of been a side effect of increasing not only same-sex consorts and crown lists, but we're seeing more women fighters, and which I also think is amazing. Personally, I am working on a more comprehensive historical list of LGBTQ sitting royalty. I've had people all the way back in the 90s who may or may not have been out at the time. They were still a king and a queen or a prince and a princess, but one of them might have been queer, either openly or not. And some of those people who are now out are saying, yeah, I was queer back then. I just wasn't out to the kingdom at the time. Working on that as a long-term project. I have a lot of long-term projects. Pennsic continued to chug along. We had a lot more stuff happening at Pennsic. North Shield granted the clan their Order of the Hearthstone Award for hospitality. The clan celebrated their 25th anniversary in 2015. The 26th encampment was in 2016. 2018 pronoun pins exploded all over the place. You could saw them everywhere. They started doing LGBTQ youth meetups at Family Point in 2018. And there was a movement at the time to create safe space showers in different encampments. Blue Feather was one, but we didn't start that trend. So it was, if you are a trans person or otherwise not comfortable, non-binary, otherwise not comfortable going into where you're expected to go, come to our camp. We'll let you use our shower. Other events happening outside of Pennsic. At the 50-year celebration in 2016, there was a diversity ball sponsored by the clan. There was a queer history Scola event in the East Kingdom in 2019. Then there was this pandemic-y thing, that happened apparently. So then there was a virtual queer event called the Cut Sleeve Pride in Eldermere in 2021. West Kingdom had a big DEI roundtable in 2022. We've got this event now happening in 2024. There's an ongoing conversation in the fencing and heavy armor or heavy fighting communities talking about protection and how to make it inclusive and how to make it apply effectively to everyone without really getting into what is your current biological makeup, because that ain't nobody's business, but they also want everybody to be safe. It's an ongoing conversation. I applaud anyone who is involved in it because I know it is a minefield. I don't know that it needs to be, but I know that it is. And I know that our current society marshal is very invested in settling all of that once and for all. So some good people at the top right now who are trying to make positive and affect good change for the future. And of course, the creation of the DEI, or now the DEIB office, was a watershed moment. Those started on the kingdoms, individual kingdoms at first. And they were successful and effective. They created the corporate officer. Now the new proposal is to split it into two officers, one corporate, one game facing society. They have not finalized that yet. You can still write to the board and express your opinion on that. But the current DEIB officer supports it and thinks it's a great move for the organization as a whole. And after a very long breath, that brings us to today. What do we do next? We're doing things like this. Certainly, oh, you know what I forgot to mention too? In the fall, I can't believe I didn't mention that. There was the FAFO Around and Find Out Challenge, which was the everybody take your pride flag colors and make garb out of it. And they did they just did it a 12th night in Antier, huge success. And that's fantastic. A lot of people say, well, what do we need the blue feather for if we can just wear our pride colors or wear a pride flag or wear the trans flag? And my argument is there's room for both. First of all, by all means, wear your pride colors. They're your colors. Do what you want to do with them. I am a proponent of the fact that the Klan has existed for 30 years. We've done incredibly good work for 30 years in the Klan's name, and it is our symbol. It is uniquely Scadian. It's somewhat known in Ren Fair circles, but not nearly as much. But we created it. It's a for us, by us, and I'm very proud of that symbol. I'm so proud of that symbol. I had it permanently added to my body as my 50th birthday present to myself. And I have way too much blue feather swag to give it up now. But I do have a lot of rainbow stuff as well, because that's my flag. In the meantime, we've got social media galore. We're getting a website refresh. We had someone just volunteer to do that. We're going to be working with them. The Facebook group, the Clan Blue Feather Facebook group is very active, and there are individual kingdom Facebook groups. So like if you want to do something at a kingdom event or a local event, you could post there without having to bother everybody all over the known world. There's a Discord server. It's sort of light right now, but absolutely that could use some love and attention if that's where people are spending their time on social media. I got like 5 minutes if we could do some quick questions. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to show you some of the swag I have, just because I love my swag. Every year at Penzic, there always seemed to be somebody doing a blue feather thing. And of course, I had to buy every one of them. So we had like favors, blue feather trim. I have a couple outfits with that on it. The encampment has their own, oh, you can't see it because of my green screen. The encampment has their own device now. That's actually a green field with a campfire and the blue feather on a hill. That's why this is our badge. I've got my pouch that I wear everywhere I go. I just bought a new bag with all heart-shaped feathers on it. We go all out. We love our feathers.
So Josh, question.
Yes,
Do you have a Discord link that you can post in the
if you
comments?
give me like 2 seconds, I will pull it up. I probably should have had that, huh? But I do have Discord up and running. I can jump into the Clan Blue Feather. I can click on the invite people. I can click on the copy link. My God, it's almost like I know how to do technology. All right.
While you do that, Maestro Eduardo has his hand up and would like to ask you a question, if that's
Go
okay.
right ahead.
Okay. Your Highness?
Sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute on my phone instead of my computer. Thank you so much for everything. I would like to really acknowledge the support that Clan Blue Feather gave to the inspirational equality movement. We very much appreciated that support.
And I know I was going to say, Eduardo, I know you were at the tip of the spear on that.
Thank you. It was a big spear. It was more like a wedge afterwards because we had so much help. So thank you so much. And I did want to say that, the inspirational equality movement actually didn't start because we wanted access to the crown or we wanted to be princes or kings. It actually started because Ariel just wanted to fight for the person she loved.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Now I have to figure
That's
out
the
how
way
to
it should
mute
be,
myself.
right?
I got
Yeah,
you.
and I
I muted Eduardo before he stopped talking. I'm so sorry.
oh, that's okay. I just wanted to say that, for me, being the instigator, I like to say, rather than the tip of the spear, because there were so many people, never crossed my mind that this was for me. It was for everybody else. I saw injustice. I wanted it to change. And, 15 years later, now I get to have a fancy hat.
Congratulations. Other questions, comments?
I don't see anything.
Eventually, we have a very brief history of the clan on our website. It's bluefeather.org. I'll throw that in there now. It really is in need of a refresh, so don't take it too seriously. We're definitely working on it, but there is a little history section there. And all of this is on there. I'm probably going to use one of these recorded sessions and throw it up on YouTube to make it a permanent viewable of this class, because I've given it the last like 5 or 6 Penzics. I've given it at almost every diversity virtual event. I've given it at Lancia University a couple times. And I always seem to get a good turnout. So there's always people, and there's always a new crop of people that go, what's Clan Blue Feather? Never heard of it. Or what's Clan Blue Feather? I thought that was a private household or defunct or just a bunch of old white gay guys. So I'm not only here to give the history, but I'm also here to dispel rumors and raise awareness. Because like I said, use your pride flags, but Blue Feather still exists. Blue Feather is everyone. Blue Feather is the community as far as I'm concerned. So I think that's probably it, unless there's anything else. I'm sorry, I was typing to the wrong person. There's the Discord link. And there is the website link for you. Oops, no, that's the Discord again.
Oh, here.
And then, like I said, join us on Facebook, join us on Discord, be part of the conversation, do good work, be honorable and be chivalrous. And if you come to Penzic, by all means, stop by the encampment. Our fire is lit every night. Everyone is welcome around it. We are very much a drop-in and hang out kind of encampment. We are the funniest people we know, and we think you'll feel the same. If you want to go to Penzic and camp, I'm the person to contact, and I will get you set up and ready to go. And come to the Blue Feather Ball. And if there's any Blue Feather events going on in your local area, attend them, because we're amazing.
Are there any other questions or comments before we stop recording? Not seeing any hands. Okay. Thank you so much. That was awesome. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.
I know that was a lot. Thank you for being patient.